Hello and welcome to Amoeba Savant. I am reading the Brothers Karamazov, and this is part 1, book 3, chapter 10. It is called Two Women Meet. Alyosha left his father's house even sadder and more depressed than when he had entered it. His thoughts were splintered and scattered, and he realized that he was afraid to bring all the fragments together to get a total picture of all the painful and conflicting feelings he had experienced in the course of that day. He was bordering on despair, something that had never happened to him before. Above all his preoccupations, like a mountain, loomed the fateful and unanswerable question: how would it end between his father and his brother Dmitri, with that sinister woman between them? Now he had witnessed it himself. He had been there and had seen them facing each other, and Alyosha felt that the one who was likely to be most hurt horribly in this affair, was Dmitri, and that a terrible catastrophe was awaiting his brother. There were other people involved in this affair too, involved much more deeply than Alyosha could have imagined before. There was something puzzling, something mysterious about it all. For instance, his other brother Ivan had made a warm gesture toward him, something Alyosha had been hoping for all this time. Of course, Rosie wants out. Something Alyosha had been hoping for all this time. But now, for some reason or other, that friendly gesture frightened him. Then, those two women. When a few hours earlier he had set out to see Katerina, one of the two, he had been in a state of great embarrassment, but now, on his way to her house, he felt completely at ease. In fact, he was impatient to see her, as though hoping to obtain from her some indication of what he should do next. He realized, though, that it would be even more difficult to transmit Dmitri's message to her now that Dmitri had given up all hope of paying her back the 3,000 rubles. Since Dmitri felt disgraced and had no prospects of getting any money, Alyosha knew that his brother would do nothing to prevent himself from slipping lower and lower. And on top of it all, Dmitri had asked him to tell Katerina about the disgraceful scene in their father's house. It was 7 o'clock and just getting dark when Alyosha entered the spacious, comfortable house on Bolshaya Street. He knew that Katerina lived with two aunts. That is, one of these women was actually her sister Agafya's quiet, self-effacing aunt, who had lived in her father's house and had looked after Katerina with such devotion when she had come home after her graduation from school. The other, Katerina's real aunt, was an elegant Moscow lady, albeit impoverished. It was said in town that the two aunts did exactly what Katerina wanted and only lived with her as her chaperones for the sake of appearances. As to Katerina, she only listened to the old general's widow, to whom she owed everything she had. The old lady had been kept in Moscow by her sickness, and Katerina had to write to her twice a week to keep her up to date on all the latest developments. Alyosha entered the house giving his name to the parlor maid who had opened the door for him, but apparently the ladies in the drawing room already knew of his arrival. They might have seen him from the window. He heard women's hurried footsteps rustling. It's been a long time since I wore makeup, so my eyes are watering. But apparently the ladies... He heard women's hurried footsteps, the rustling of skirts. It sounded to him as if 2 or perhaps 3 women had hurried out of the drawing room. It struck him as strange that his arrival should cause such a commotion. He was, however, immediately shown into the drawing room. It was a very large room, elegantly and lavishly furnished, not at all the sort of drawing room one would expect to find in a small provincial town. There were many sofas, settees, armchairs, large and small tables of all kinds with a variety of vases and lamps on them. There were flowers in the vases and paintings on the walls, and also an aquarium near one of the windows. As the day was fading, the room was rather dark. Looking around him, Alyosha saw on a sofa someone's silk shawl, and on the table next to it 2 half-empty cups of chocolate, a plate of cookies, a china dish of raisins, and another of candy. Obviously, people had been sitting there a moment before. Alyosha frowned, realizing that he had stumbled on some other visitors, but at that moment the portiere was raised and Katerina came in. She held out both hands to him, looking at him with a radiant, happy smile. Behind her came the maid carrying 2 candles that she put on the table. "Ah, here you are. I'm so glad you came. I've been praying all day that you would come. Do sit down, please." Katerina's beauty struck Alyosha again, as it had 3 weeks or so before when Dmitri had brought him to introduce him to her on her insistence that she wanted to meet his youngest brother. On that occasion, however, they had not talked to each other very much. Feeling that Alyosha was very shy of her and wanting to spare him, she had hardly said anything to him and had talked mostly all the time to Dmitri. But although he had not said much on that occasion, Alyosha had seen and understood a good deal. He had been struck by Katerina's domineering ways and by her casual, easy, self-assured manner. And Alyosha had been certain that she really was as he saw her, and that he had not exaggerated these traits in her. He had thought that her big, very dark, sparkling eyes, magnificent in themselves, looked even more impressive in her pale, slightly yellowish oval face. But he had also detected in those eyes and in the line of her lips something that explained not only why Dmitri had fallen madly in love with her, but also what made it impossible for him to remain in love with her for long. He had almost told his brother about this when they left Katerina's the first time, for Dmitri had insisted that Alyosha tell him what impression his fiancée had made on him. "You'll be happy with her, but perhaps not. Perhaps you won't find peace with her." "Well, that's how it is, brother. That kind of woman never changes, never gives in. So, you don't think I'll always be in love with her?" "Why, I didn't say that. Perhaps you'll always be in love with her, but perhaps you won't always be happy." As he said this, Alyosha felt that he had turned very red and was furious with himself for having yielded to Dmitri's insistent demand that he say what he thought of Katerina, and for being forced to give such stupid answers. Besides, he felt it was quite ridiculous that he should offer his opinion about a woman, as though he were an expert in such matters. Now, when he saw her coming toward him, he immediately realized that he might have been wrong about her before. This time she radiated great warmth and kindness and complete uncompromising sincerity. Her arrogant, haughty, domineering airs had vanished, but he saw that her drive, her generosity, and her impressive self-reliance were still there. From the very first words she said, Alyosha realized that her tragic predicament with the man she loved was no mystery to her, that possibly she already knew everything, absolutely everything. Yet, despite all that, there was so much light in her face, so much faith in the future, that Alyosha felt guilty before her. He felt he had done her serious and deliberate harm. She had won him over and captured him in one fell swoop. And with all that, he also realized that she was terribly tense, and that her tension had perhaps reached the extreme limits of endurance, causing her to act as though she were in a trance. "I was so anxious to see you. You're the only one from whom I can learn the whole truth. No one else will tell it to me." "I've come," Alyosha muttered, feeling he was getting mixed up. "I came. He sent me." "So he sent you? I had a feeling he would. All right, now I understand everything." Her eyes flashed and she suddenly raised her voice. "But let me tell you first, Alexei, why I wanted to see you so badly. You see, perhaps I know much more, as it is, than you do yourself. It's not information I need from you. What I want to hear is your own personal impression. How did he seem to you when you saw him last? I want you to give me a plain, unadorned, even rude answer. Oh, you may be as rude as you wish. I want you to tell me what you thought of him and of the situation he's in after you saw him today. That would be more useful, since he doesn't wish to see me anymore, than if I went and asked him directly. Do you understand now what I want of you? Now tell me why he sent you to me. As I told you, I knew he would send you. Tell me frankly and plainly without hiding anything from me." He told me to say goodbye to you for him, that he won't come to see you anymore, and that he sends you his regards." "His regards? That's what he said? Those are his words?" "Yes." "Perhaps it was a slip of the tongue. Perhaps he meant to use some other word instead." No, he insisted that I give you his regards. He reminded me several times to tell you he sent you his regards. Just that, regards. The blood rushed to Katerina's cheeks. You must help me then, Alyosha. I can't do without your help. I'll tell you what I think, and I want you to tell me whether I'm right or not. Listen, if he just told you vaguely to say goodbye to me on his behalf and to give me his best regards, if he hadn't insisted as he did on that word regards, that would have really been the end of everything. But since he insisted on that word, made you promise not to forget it, then he must have been agitated, not himself. Don't you agree? Perhaps he made up his mind and then was frightened by his own decision. Maybe he didn't walk away from me with a cool, determined step, but took a headlong plunge as though over a precipice. His insistence on one particular word could be simply bravado, couldn't it? Right, I think so myself now, Alyosha agreed with great eagerness. And if I'm really right, then he's not lost yet. He's simply in deep despair, and I think I can pull him out of it. Wait now, did he mention anything to you about money? About a certain 3,000 rubles? Not only did he mention it, but that was perhaps what worried him most. He told me that, as things stand now, he's dishonored, and he doesn't care about anything anymore. Alyosha said, speaking with great heat, with the hope pouring back into him that perhaps there really was a way out, that his brother could still be saved. But then a thought stopped him short, and he asked in a different, hesitating tone, But how is it that you know about the money? I've known about it for a long time, and for certain I checked by writing to Moscow to find out whether the money had been received. I knew he hadn't sent it, but I never said anything to him, and last week I found that he needed more money. My only desire in all this is that he should know who is his true friend and to whom he can turn for help. But no, he refuses to believe that I am his most loyal friend. He doesn't want to get to know me really, because I'm only a woman to him. For a whole week I worried terribly for fear he would feel embarrassed in front of me for having kept and spent 3,000. I mean, let him be ashamed before other people, before himself even, but not before me. Why can't he understand, even to this day, just how much I can bear for him? Why doesn't he know me yet? How dare he not know me after all that has happened between us? I want to save him once and for all. He can forget that we are engaged if he wishes, but how can he be afraid of being dishonored in my eyes? After all, he wasn't afraid to admit that to you, was he, Alexei? Haven't I deserved by this time to be treated as you are? Tears filled her eyes as she uttered these last words, and now they were running down her cheeks. He also wanted me to tell you something else, Alyosha said, his voice quivering. He wanted me to tell you what happened between him and his father today. And he told her everything. How he had been sent to their fathers to get the money from him, how Dmitri had broken into the house, how he had given his father a brutal beating, and how after that he had again reminded Alyosha to go see her, Katerina, and give her his regards. And then he went to see that woman, Alyosha muttered finally. Why do you suppose I couldn't put up with that woman? Does he imagine that I wouldn't be able to put up with her? Besides, he won't marry her, for how could a Karamazov be eternally consumed by such a passion? And it is passion, not love, that he feels for her. She let out a nervous laugh. Besides, he won't marry her because she will never marry him, Katerina added with a strange smile. He may marry her, though, Alyosha said sadly, looking down at the floor. No, he won't. You can take my word for it. That girl, she's an angel, Katerina cried, her tone suddenly acquiring extraordinary warmth. She's a fantastic creature, without peer. I'm well aware of the fact that she's quite irresistibly fascinating, but I also know that she's kind and strong and generous. Why are you staring at me like that, Alexei? Perhaps it surprises you that I should say this. Perhaps you don't believe me. Grushenka, my dear, Katerina called suddenly, looking toward the portiere that separated the drawing room from the room next door. Please come and join us. I have a very nice visitor here, Alexei Karamazov. He knows all about our affairs. Come in and meet him, my dear." "I was waiting. I thought you'd call me." Alyosha heard a tender, almost too caressing voice. The portiere was raised and Grushenka made her entrance. She laughed gaily as she walked over to them. Something snapped inside Alyosha. He knew he was staring, but he could not take his eyes off her. So here she was, the frightful woman, that animal, as Ivan had called her half an hour before. But the woman Alyosha was looking at appeared at first glance to be a quite ordinary, pleasant, kindly person. True, she was beautiful, but beautiful though she was, she looked much like many other ordinary beautiful women. But then, in all fairness, it must be said she was very, very beautiful, and her beauty was that typical Russian beauty that inspires passion in so many men. Grushenka was not quite so tall as Katerina, who was very tall indeed. Her body was strong and full, and when she moved, her movements were so light that they seemed inaudible. And, as in her voice, there was perhaps something too provokingly tender, perhaps a touch of deliberate seductiveness in her movements. Unlike Katerina, whose step was quick and energetic, Grushenka walked noiselessly. Her feet touched the floor without a sound. She slid smoothly into an armchair with a soft rustle of her sumptuous black silk dress, drawing an expensive black cashmere shawl delicately around her strong white neck and wide shoulders. She was 22, and she looked exactly her age. Her complexion was very fair and her cheeks delicately rosy. Her face was rather broad at the temples, and her lower jaw protruded, although only very slightly. Her upper lip was much thinner than the other, which was quite full, but her magnificent, abundant, dark brown hair, her sable eyebrows, and her beautiful blue-gray eyes with their long lashes were certain to stop the least interested, most absent-minded man who met her in the street, or saw her in a crowd, even if he was in a hurry. He would not be able to help staring at her and remembering her for a long time. What struck Alyosha most about her face was its childlike, trusting expression. She looked like a child who was delighted about something, and as she came toward the table, she looked just that delighted, as though she expected something nice to happen and was full of curiosity and trusting anticipation. Her gaiety was contagious, and Alyosha felt its effect. And there was something else in her, too, that Alyosha could not have described, but that he felt, although perhaps unconsciously, a lightness and softness of movement, a strange cat-like noiselessness, which was in curious contrast to her large, powerful body. For under the cashmere shawl he could see her broad shoulders and her full young bosom. The curves under her dress suggested the proportions of a Venus de Milo, although already somewhat exaggerated. Those who know the beauty of Russian women could have told by looking at Grushenka that by the time this young beauty was 30, her body would lose its harmony, her face would grow flabby, wrinkles would appear around her eyes and forehead, her complexion would coarsen, perhaps turn ruddy. In a word, Grushenka had the beauty of an hour, a fleeting beauty that one so often meets among Russian women. Of course, this is not what Alyosha was thinking when he saw her. Although he was fascinated by her, he wondered at the same time, with a touch of irritation, why she had to drawl as she did instead of speaking naturally. Evidently she thought that drawing out certain vowels and modulating certain syllables exaggeratedly made her voice beautiful and attractive. Of course, it was her humble background and lack of education that were to blame. Her way of talking was the result of a childhood misconception about proper speech. To Alyosha, however, her accent and her intonation seemed incongruous, incompatible with her happy childlike expression and the radiant purity of her eyes. After kissing her warmly several times on her laughing lips, Katerina asked her to sit down in an armchair directly in front of Alyosha. Katerina acted as though she were in love with Grushenka. "This is the first time the two of us have met," Katerina announced to Alyosha in an excited tone. "It was I who wanted to meet her, to get to know her. I was prepared to go to her place, but as soon as she learned of my wish, she came here herself instead. and I was sure beforehand that we could settle everything between the two of us. I just had a feeling it would be this way. Some people tried to convince me not to do it, but I followed my own hunch, and I was right. Grushenka has explained everything and told me her plans. Like a good angel, she descended and brought peace and mind and joy. And you didn't feel you were too good for me, dear, sweet Miss Katerina? Grushenka drawled in her sing-song voice, still radiating her warm, cheerful smile. You mustn't say that. You know very well what a bewitching, irresistible charmer you are. How could I possibly have felt I was too good for you? Here, let me kiss once more that lower lip of yours. It's so full. It looks almost swollen, and I'd like to make it even more swollen again and again. Ah, Alexei, the laughter of hers, it gladdens one's heart to look at this angel. Alyosha blushed, shaken by tiny, imperceptible shivers. You're certainly very sweet to me, Miss Katerina, but you may find that I don't really deserve your kindness. How can you say that? How can you not deserve it? I want you to know, Alexei, that Grushenka here is very whimsical, that she can be eccentric, and that she's very, very proud. And she's also generous and magnanimous, Alexei. Did you know that? The only trouble was that she was unhappy. She was too willing to sacrifice everything for an unworthy and irresponsible person. There was someone once, also an army officer, she fell in love with him and gave herself to him. That was long ago, 5 years or so. But he forgot her and married someone else. Now he is a widower and has written that he's on his way here. And you know what? He's the only man she has ever loved, whom she still loves, and whom she will always love. So he will come back and Grushenka will be happy again. During these past 5 years, she has been desperately unhappy. But who can say anything against her? Who can boast of having enjoyed her special favors? There was only one man who was close to her, the bedridden old merchant, but then he was much more of a father, a guardian to her than anything else. He appeared on the scene when she was in deep despair, when she was disconsolate after having been deserted by the man she loved, and you know, she would have drowned herself if that old merchant hadn't stopped her then. You're really defending me too much, dear Miss Katerina. Aren't you a bit quick to draw conclusions? Grushenka said, still in her drawling voice. I defend you? Who am I to defend you? I would never have the presumption to do that, Grushenka, my dear angel. Give me your hand, Grushenka. Look at this tender, plump, charming hand, Alexei. And since the owner of this hand has brought me back to life and made me happy, I will kiss it now. Mwah! Kiss the back of it and the palm, and see and hear and hear and hear again. Katerina eagerly kissed Grushenka's really beautiful, although perhaps rather plump hand 3 times. Grushenka, although she offered her hand quite willingly, watched Katerina with a charming, nervous little laugh, obviously enjoying having her hand kissed by the lady she addressed as Miss Katerina. Alyosha turned red. Perhaps, the thought flashed through his head, she's overdoing her enthusiasm a bit. He felt somehow tense and nervous. You know, Miss Katerina, you won't make me feel embarrassed by kissing my hand like this in front of young Mr. Karamazov here, Grushenka said. But I wasn't trying to embarrass you, Grushenka, Katerina said, slightly taken aback. Ah, how little you understand me, my dear. And perhaps you don't quite understand me either, dear Miss Katerina. Perhaps you'll find that I'm not nearly as nice as I seem. I'm headstrong, and my heart is wicked. It was just to have a good laugh, and that I made poor Dmitri Karamazov so crazy about me. Yes, but now you're going to save him. You'll talk reason to him and explain to him that you love another man, that you've loved that other man for a long time, and that now he has asked you to marry him. No, I never promised you anything of the sort. It was you who said all those things, but I never promised. Well then, I must have indeed have misunderstood you, Katerina said very quietly, turning slightly paler. You did Promise, though. No, my angel Katerina, I promised you nothing at all, Grushenka interrupted, looking at her with the same cheerful, innocent expression. You see for yourself, my worthy young lady, how wicked and headstrong I really am, for I'll do whatever I feel like at that particular moment. I may have promised you something before, but just now I thought to myself, and what if I take a fancy to him again, that Mitya fellow, since I took a fancy to him once, and it lasted nearly a whole hour? I may even go right now and tell him to come and stay with me. That's how fickle I am. That's not at all what you said a little while ago, Katerina whispered, barely audible. Not at all. That was a little while ago, but you see, I'm a bit soft-hearted and silly. Just think what he's been through because of me. So what if I feel sorry for him when I get back home? What then? I never expected. Well, dear Miss Katerina, I make you look very good. You're so kind and generous compared with me, and I suppose you'll stop loving poor silly me once you've got to know me better. So give me your sweet little hand, Miss Katerina, my angel, Grushenka said in a tender voice, in a tone of great reverence, taking Katerina's hand in hers, and I will kiss it just as you kissed mine. Dear miss, you kissed my hand 3 times, so, to make things even, I should kiss yours 300 times. Well, that's how it is, and after this, let it be according to God's will. Perhaps I'll end up as your slave and do everything to please you, as a slave must. So let it be just as God decides for us all. There's no need for any arrangements, agreements, or promises between us. Ah, what a pretty hand you have. A sweet, sweet hand. Ah, my dear miss, you're so beautiful, it's just impossible. Slowly, Grushenka raised Katerina's hand to her lips with the strange intention of getting even with her in hand-kissing. Katerina made no effort to pull her hand away. She had listened with still flickering hope to Grushenka's words about the possibility of doing everything to please her one day like, quote, a slave. She looked intently into Grushenka's eyes and saw in them still the same cheerful, innocent trustfulness as before. She may be a little too naive, Katerina thought with a spark of hope, as Grushenka was still slowly raising her hand toward her lips. But when her lips were almost touching Katerina's hand, Grushenka stopped, as if something had suddenly occurred to her. You know what, Miss Katerina, my angel, she announced, in a voice even more sweet and tender than before, I think I may still decide not to kiss your hand after all. And she broke into a very cheerful, tinkling laughter. Please yourself, Katerina said with a shudder. But why are you doing this? I simply want to remember that you kissed my hand and I didn't kiss yours. Something suddenly flashed in her eyes, and she looked at Katerina with terrible intensity. You're an insolent creature, Katerina flared up. She seemed to have suddenly understood. She leapt up from her chair. Grushenka stood up too, but unhurriedly. And now I'll be able to tell Mitya about you kissing my hand while I wouldn't kiss yours. I can just imagine how he'll laugh. Get out, you filthy slut! Get out of here! Oh, you should be ashamed of yourself talking like that, dear young lady. You shouldn't use words like that, sweetie. Get out, you whore! Katerina was screaming now, every part of her face quivering and distorted by rage. You're a fine one to call me a whore. And what about you going to visit gentlemen after dark to try and peddle your charms for money? Why, I know all about that. Katerina let out a wild yell and would have thrown herself on Grushenka if Alyosha had not seized her and held her back with all his strength. Don't move, he was saying. Don't say anything. Don't answer her. She'll go. She'll leave now. Katerina's 2 aunts and the maid came running into the drawing room, and the 3 hurried to her. Yes, I'm leaving, Grushenka said, picking up her shawl from the sofa. Please, Alyosha, won't you see me off? Hurry, go. Please go, Alyosha said, clasping his hands beseechingly. But I want you to see me off, my sweet boy. I promised to tell you something that'll please you very much. It was for your sake, Alyosha, that I put on all this show. See me off now. Later, you'll be glad you did. Alyosha turned away from her, nervously clasping and unclasping his hands. Grushenka, letting out peals of laughter, ran from the room. Katerina had some kind of fit. She sobbed, shook convulsively, gasped for breath. The women fussed around her. "I warned you," the older aunt said. "I tried to stop you from doing this. You're much too rash. How could you allow this to happen? You know nothing about women of that type, and I've heard that this one is the worst of them all. I think you're much too impulsive, Katerina." "She's a wild beast, that's what she is," Katerina screamed. "I wish you hadn't held me back, Alexei. I'd have given her such a beating. I'd have beaten her mercilessly." She could not restrain herself in front of Alyosha. Perhaps she did not even want to. She must be flogged in public. Alyosha started backing toward the door. "But my God," Katerina cried out in a different voice now, throwing up her arms in despair. "How could he be so dishonorable, so inhuman? He told that creature what happened on that terrible, fateful, accursed day when I was, as she put it, trying to peddle my charms for money. So she knows. Well, for your information, Alexei, your dear brother is a low, despicable man." Alyosha wanted to say something, but words would not come to him. His heart contracted painfully. "Go now, Alexei. I feel ashamed, terribly ashamed, but please come back tomorrow. I beg you on my knees to come. And I beg you not to judge me too harshly. I still don't know what I'll do with myself." Alyosha almost staggered out into the street. He was on the verge of tears himself. The maid came running after him. "Miss Katerina forgot to give you this letter, sir. It's from Mrs. Koklakov, and she received it at lunchtime." Alyosha took the small pink envelope and put it in his pocket, hardly realizing what he was doing. And that's the end of chapter 10. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video where I read chapter 11, One More Reputation Ruined. See you then. Bye.